On the morning of the 25th of September 2025, the United Nations headquarters in New York braced itself for another day of carefully choreographed diplomacy. Delegates from across the globe had gathered for the 80th Annual General Assembly, a ritual of speeches, resolutions, and formalities. But beneath the marble ceilings and polished language, a tension simmered, for this session promised something unexpected. Amid the usual parade of addresses, one speech was whispered about in corridors but never confirmed in the official agenda. It was said to be a secret confession, drafted not in Ouagadougou, but in the power centers of Paris, Washington, and Tel Aviv, an ultimatum intended to force Burkina Faso's young president, Ibrahim Traoré, into bowing his head before the world. When his turn came, the atmosphere inside the grand hall thickened with anticipation. Was this the moment a defiant African voice would be silenced by scripted humiliation? Or would history witness the rise of a new symbol of resistance? Cameras trained on the young leader, and millions around the globe waited in collective breath. Then Traoré began to speak, and with his first words, it became clear he would not submit. His voice carried no tremor. Instead, it gathered strength, cadence, and conviction as he set aside the imposed confession and unveiled what he called an indictment of history, a charge sheet of crimes committed against Africa. He began with what he named the first great crime, the transatlantic slave trade. With chilling clarity, he recalled the suffering of over 12 million Africans ripped from their homes, shackled, and sold into bondage. The empires of cotton, sugar, and coffee were built on our blood, he thundered. This, he insisted, was not buried in history, but remained the foundation upon which Western wealth still stood. The hall remained silent, the weight of his words pressing down on delegates unaccustomed to hearing such blunt truths voiced within these walls. Without pause, he advanced to the second crime, the financial shackles of the CFA franc. 14 African nations, he declared, were still forced to deposit half of their reserves into the French treasury, a practice dating back to the 1,960 seconds. Over $500 billion has been withheld, he cried. Is this freedom or just another chain? His accusations struck like hammer blows, and the discomfort among European representatives became palpable. From there, he turned to the Rwandan genocide, naming it the third crime, and laying bare the complicity of foreign powers, particularly France, in shielding perpetrators, while 800,000 lives were extinguished in 100 days. The charges did not end there. One by one, Traoré enumerated the offenses, the crippling debt traps of the International Monetary Fund that hollowed out public health systems in places like Zambia, leaving children to die for lack of affordable medicine. The systematic destruction of African agriculture, where liberalization bankrupted cocoa farmers in Ghana, while corporations like Nestle and Cargill amassed billions. The assassinations of leaders, such as Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara, silenced for daring to speak of dignity. His voice sharpened as he named dictators propped up during the Cold War, resources plundered from Nigeria's oil fields, leaving behind poisoned rivers, and the proliferation of foreign military bases that stood as chains on African sovereignty. Each count was laid with precision, each silence from the hall heavier than applause could have been. By the time he spoke of the manipulation of human rights condemned when convenient, ignored when expedient, the chamber no longer resembled a diplomatic forum. It had transformed into something else, a courtroom with the West standing trial. Delegates shifted in their seats. Some scribbled nervously, others kept their eyes fixed on the floor. Still, Traoré was not finished. With startling audacity, he turned from historical indictments to living names. Emmanuel Macron, he declared, was not merely a president, but the heir of an empire of colonizers. Donald Trump, he accused of trading oil and resources for power at the cost of African lives. Even the directors of the IMF were unmasked as wardens of a financial prison, building cages and calling them reforms. In a chamber long accustomed to veiled criticism and diplomatic language, the bluntness was electrifying. The hall was divided not by geopolitical blocks, but by those who felt indicted and those who felt vindicated. Yet Traoré's defiance was not a plea for pity, but a demand for justice. Evoking the memory of Thomas Sankara, assassinated decades earlier for his unyielding vision of African independence, he declared that Sankara's flame had not been extinguished. "We want an Africa that decides for itself," he said, his words rising with the rhythm of prophecy. He envisioned a continent free from foreign bases, free from debt bondage, and united in dignity. He called for a union of black gold, not merely oil and minerals, but the strength of African people, their culture, and their will. For a moment, the assembly ceased to be an arena of states and became something closer to a gathering of witnesses. The silence that followed his final words was unlike any the chamber had known. It was not rejection nor applause, but an uncertainty heavy with consequence. The United Nations chose not to publish his speech, citing procedural irregularities, yet the words could not be contained. Within hours, the transcript leaked online. Across Africa, social media erupted. From Nairobi to Lagos, from Johannesburg to Dakar, his declaration, "We ask for no pity, we demand justice," spread like wildfire. Young Africans in Paris and London marched with placards proclaiming, "Traoré speaks for us." Diaspora communities echoed his defiance, while African American leaders drew parallels to civil rights struggles, finding resonance in his unflinching voice. In policy circles, the speech sparked alarm. Analysts in Washington warned of a dangerous precedent, fearing that if Burkina Faso could challenge the status quo so openly, other nations might follow. Newspapers in the United States tread cautiously, debating whether Traoré's words were reckless provocation or a reshaping of the global moral conversation. African communities, meanwhile, embraced him as a symbol. Churches in America quoted his declaration from the pulpit. Youth movements in Latin America and Asia echoed his call for dignity and independence. Hashtags tied to his vision of a union of black gold surged across continents, uniting voices under a banner of justice long denied. What began as an attempt to coerce a confession ended with an indictment that reverberated across the globe. By refusing to read the script drafted for his submission, Traoré transformed weakness into strength. Observers noted that the brilliance lay not only in what he said, but in what he refused to say. He granted no legitimacy to the ultimatum imposed upon him. In his silence toward it, he rendered it meaningless. The confession became irrelevant. The indictment became immortal. Images of him leaving the UN hall, clutching the folded file that had been intended as his humiliation, spread like wildfire. Commentators compared it to Mandela's raised fist or Nkrumah's declaration of independence. Traoré was no longer seen merely as the president of Burkina Faso, but as the embodiment of Africa's defiance. His words echoed in classrooms, churches, and public squares, reminding millions that freedom is not granted, it is claimed. The lessons of that day extended beyond geopolitics. His speech became a meditation on dignity, reminding the world that true honor does not come from recognition by foreign powers, but from refusing to kneel when every force conspires against you. It became a lesson in memory, for peace without truth is merely silence, and the wounds of slavery and colonization remain unhealed until acknowledged. It became a lesson in courage, the choice to speak truth before the powerful without assurance of outcome. And it became a lesson in identity, a call to embrace heritage and culture, not as burdens but as treasures to defend. As the dust settled, the world was left with questions larger than one man or one nation. Was Ibrahim Traoré a passing figure of defiance, or had he ignited a new chapter in global history? Was this the rebirth of African unity, or simply a flare in a long struggle? Whatever the answers, one truth was undeniable. A speech meant to break him had instead elevated him, and Burkina Faso, once overlooked on world maps, now stood at the center of a profound reckoning. His closing words still echo across continents. "We did not ask permission to be free. We stood up to claim it. For millions, those words are no longer lines in a speech. They are a call to action, a reminder that freedom is never given, only seized by those who dare. And in that truth lies the enduring legacy of Ibrahim Traoré's thunderclap of defiance at the United Nations.